If you've ever been underestimated or silenced by those louder than you, this story will whisper the secret they never saw coming. Because sometimes, the sharpest mind speaks through silence, not words. In a valley tucked between the blue shoulders of two mountains, there lived a quiet shepherd named Aarif. His days passed watching over his sheep, listening to the language of the wind and reading stories in the clouds. He wasn't loud or clever in the way people wanted him to be. In the village square, men mocked him gently. Aarif, he couldn't win an argument with a sleeping cat. But Aarif never responded. He'd simply smile, lower his gaze, and keep tending his flock. What they mistook for weakness was actually his strength. He observed, absorbed, and understood people without needing to prove himself. His mother often told him, "My son, when hearts are noisy, wisdom hides. Keep your silence. It will speak for you one day." One dawn, a royal messenger rode through the valley with an announcement that caught the whole village by storm. The king of the realm had declared a contest of wisdom. The challenge was simple, yet impossible. Whoever could outsmart the royal advisors without speaking a single word would be rewarded with gold equal to his age and granted a seat among the king's learned men. The villagers laughed. "Aarif, this is your chance. You're already halfway there. You never talk anyway." The laughter rolled like thunder through the fields. Aarif only smiled, tied his woolen cloak tighter, and whispered to himself. Silence can be a weapon if you know when to use it. That night, he gazed at the moon reflected in a pond. He saw how stillness could show truth clearly, but only when the water was calm. And so, with calmness in his heart, he began his journey to the capital. The path to the royal city was no gentle road. It wound through roaring rivers, endless deserts, and forests so thick that sunlight had to fight to touch the ground. Each night, Aarif sat by a small fire, listening to the sounds of nature. The whispers of the trees, the cries of wolves, the sigh of the wind. Every sound taught him something: patience, timing, humility. One afternoon, he came upon a caravan resting by an oasis. Among them was a proud scholar named Fadil, whose tongue was as sharp as his quill. Fadil boasted of his victories in debates, claiming he could silence any man with logic. When he heard that Aarif was heading to challenge the king's advisors without speaking a single word, he laughed so hard he nearly spilled his tea. "Boy, silence is for fools who have nothing to say. Words win wars and crowns." Aarif looked at him, then bent down to pick up a fallen feather. He let it float on the breeze and watched it drift away, graceful and effortless. Fadil frowned, confused. "What does that mean?" Aarif only smiled, bowed his head politely, and continued walking. The scholar stood frozen, staring at the feather until realization dawned. The feather moved not by force, but by understanding the wind. By the time Aarif reached the capital, word of the silent shepherd had already spread. Crowds gathered to see the one who dared challenge the court of scholars with nothing but silence. The palace itself shimmered with gold and marble, its halls filled with the scent of incense and pride. The king sat on a high throne, his crown gleaming like dawn. On either side stood 6 of the wisest men in the kingdom, philosophers, judges, poets, and mathematicians. Their faces carried the calm of those who believed they could never be defeated. The king raised his hand. "You may begin." Aarif bowed deeply, but said nothing. He placed his wooden staff upon the marble floor, drew a small circle around it with the dust from his sandals, and stepped back. The first advisor smirked and drew a larger circle around Aarif's, as if to say, "My wisdom surpasses yours." Aarif calmly picked up a pebble and dropped it inside the advisor's circle. The second advisor, annoyed, drew a straight line cutting through both circles. Aarif crouched, lifted the pebble, and balanced it on that line. The third advisor, furious, waved his hand as if brushing the circles away. Aarif responded by lowering his gaze and pressing his hand over his heart, a gesture of peace. The crowd watched in silence, bewildered by this wordless duel of intellect. Every movement was slow, deliberate, and rich with meaning. The advisors began to argue among themselves. "He's mocking us. No, he's representing the soul within the boundaries of logic. You're all fools. He's just drawing nonsense." And while they shouted, Aarif simply stood there, calm, unreadable, untouchable. When the noise faded, the king rose slowly from his throne. His eyes studied Aarif with admiration. "You have not spoken once, and yet you have silenced every man here. Tell me, shepherd, what is your secret?" Aarif bowed and replied softly, his voice humble yet firm. "Your Majesty, I did not come to speak, I came to see. And I have seen that wisdom does not live in the tongue. It lives in the eyes that notice and the heart that waits." The king smiled. "Then you have taught the court today that silence can be the loudest language of all." That night, the shepherd left the palace with gold he never counted, and a reputation that outlived him by centuries. Even the advisors, once proud and dismissive, later admitted that they had met a man who used silence, not as weakness, but as a mirror, one that reflected their own noise. This story tells us that you don't need to shout to be heard. True intelligence listens, observes, and answers only when silence has done its work. If this story moved you, subscribe for more timeless tales that speak to the heart even when words fall short. Your next story might just change the way you see the world.